We come now to a 10-minute rule motion. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to provide for the introduction of proportional representation as a method for electing members of the House of Commons, to reduce the voting age to 16 in all UK elections and referenda, and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, I'm introducing this bill today because our electoral system is broken, and we urgently need to address some of the reasons why. As a country, we pride ourselves on our strong commitment to democracy, yet the vast majority of votes up and down the land simply do not count. Power is held by a small minority, and the voting system upholds the status quo. Now, we may be on the path to leaving the EU, but all those who are promised that they will be given back control simply will not have it without meaningful electoral reform. Now, the current unrepresentative voting system is doing long-term, pervasive damage. It manifests itself in phenomena like the widespread lack of trust and faith in public servants and the growth of what some have coined with Orwellian overtones post-truth politics. Far too many of our constituents are disillusioned, disaffected and disengaged, and continuing to deny them a voice in the decisions that affect us all only perpetuates the problems. Yet that is exactly what happens under our first-past-the-post voting system, a system where votes are not all equal, because unless you live in one of the small number of heavily targeted marginal seats, your vote, quite simply, does not count. The Electoral Reform Society has described the 2015 general election as, and I quote, the most disproportionate in electoral history, with this government elected on just 24% of the eligible vote. First Past the Post has in fact a long record of failing to deliver governments that command genuine majority support. In 1997, Labour gained 43.2% of the total votes cast, but won 63% of seats at Westminster. Yet in that same election, the combined number of votes for the Tories and Liberal Democrats represented 47.5% of the total vote, nearly 4% more than Labour. Yet between them, they got 32% of the seats available at Westminster. In fact, not since 1931 has a Prime Minister won a majority of the vote to match his or her majority in the Commons. Not Blair, not Thatcher, not Attlee. Moreover, First Past the Post creates seats so safe that some incumbents are so relaxed as to be almost horizontal. Now, this complacency in MPs is matched by disillusionment amongst voters. How does it engage people in the political process if large numbers are driven to vote tactically rather than to vote for what they actually want, since, as so many campaign leaflets are always reminding us, Party X can't win in this area? And I think it's an interesting fact to observe that MPs in safe seats were twice as likely as those with the smallest majorities to be found abusing the expenses system. Now, back in the 1950s, most people simply voted Labour or Conservative. But since then, the proportion of people voting for the two main parties has fallen from 97% to 67%. Parties other than the big three received 10% of the votes at the 2005 and 2010 elections, but in 2015 that rose to a staggering 24.9%, nearly a quarter, the biggest share since 1945. In other words, people vote differently now, and we urgently need a voting system that is updated to reflect that. Now, my bill would introduce a proportional voting or PR system, and there are two main PR systems. My preference is for one known as the additional member system, because it retains the constituency link that most MPs value enormously. But I have deliberately not specified which system should be introduced because it's the principle that I am seeking to establish at this stage. Of course, all voting systems have advantages and drawbacks, but none are so mind-bending that the public can't cope with their complexities, despite what many detractors of PR like to claim. They perhaps forget that voters already manage a PR system used for the London Assembly and for the Scottish and Welsh Parliament members, and of course the single transferable vote for European elections. And that same attitude demonstrates the very lack of respect for voters that adherence to the disproportionate first-past-the-post system perpetuates. Voters are not stupid. They know that when they are being spun a line or being patronised, and it is deeply insulting to be denying them a fair vote on the basis that they wouldn't know how to use it. And as an aside, the voters decisively rejected the alternative vote system in 2011 is irrelevant. AV is not PR. Now, under PR, there is a simple relationship of cause and effect for the voter. If you vote for a candidate, you increase his or her chances of getting elected. If you vote for a party, you increase the party's entitlement to seats. By doing this, you achieve more representation for your views. First past the post does not deliver seats that look like the votes cast. PR does. Now, a winner-takes-all system in which the Conservatives claim to have a mandate based on 37% of the vote and just 24% of the electorate is not sustainable. Nor is one in which Greens quadrupled their share of the vote nationally to 1.1 million votes in 2015 and got one seat. UKIP polled 3.8 million seats. I don't like their policies, but that's still not right. They got just one seat. And the SNP, who I am very glad to call my honourable friends, polled 1.4 million and they won 56 seats, which I know even they would agree is a little bit disproportionate, which is why they're here in such force, and I welcome that. I'm very grateful to them. Now, of course, changing the voting system would not necessarily have changed the overall outcome, but that's not the central point here. The main reason for introducing PR is that making every vote count is a vital part of the process of reconnecting people in politics, and I believe, actually, that encouraging more people to come out to vote because they know their vote matters, I think it would see an increased voter turnout. Now, some people say that people aren't interested in politics, but everyone is interested in the state of their local schools and whether or not they have a local hospital. These are political matters. And whatever your take on the recent EU referendum, it demonstrated that if you give people a say, they can be very political indeed in the best possible sense of the word, as citizens who feel they can be genuine agents for change. And I'd also anticipate that under PR we'd return a parliament that better reflects modern Britain. Only 29% of MPs are women, and although that's more than ever before, it's still not right when women make up just over half the country's adult population. People of colour, disabled people, carers, LGBT people are still underrepresented in Parliament. And I think that would change under PR, because under PR, MPs can't just rely on the votes of their tribe. To win the support of a majority of voters, they're forced to reach out across the party divides to the wider electorate. 2 more women, 2 more BME communities, and so on. And hopefully that means traditionally excluded groups standing for election too. Now, above all, proportional representation is about fairness, and that's why my bill puts PR hand in hand with giving 16 and 17-year-olds the vote. 16-year-olds are considered old enough to enter into marriage and civil partnerships, pay income tax and national insurance, obtain welfare benefits in their own right, join the armed forces, join a political party or trade union. Surely they should help elect the MPs that make decisions over these very things. Now, about 64% of registered voters aged 18 to 24 went to the polls in the EU referendum, compared to an estimated 52% in the last general election. In other words, increased awareness of voter registration, combined with a vote that actually counts, mean young people come out in large numbers to voice their opinions. Now, the UK was one of the first countries in the world to lower the voting age from 21 to 18, but right now it's trailing behind countries like Brazil, Argentina and Austria. Unless, of course, you live in Scotland, which has blazed a trail with a more inclusive and equal political system by giving 16 and 17-year-olds the vote in the independence referendum. Now, those young people need a say not just on the future of the Union, but on all decisions that affect their future. And we need equality between 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland and the rest of the UK. Mr. Speaker, if democracy is about fairly representing the views of the people, then right now our current democratic system is failing. And in future, especially with the government's planned boundary changes, that could get even worse. PR would bring some much-needed fairness, as well as helping to tackle some of the reasons that people don't vote, that idea that their vote doesn't make a difference. Now, just under a month ago, people opted to take back control of our democracy. Yet unless we reform the electoral system, they still have virtually no control over who runs the country or who represents them in Parliament. Now, much has been said, rightly, about the importance of reversing the alienation and neglect felt in many parts of our country and which this EU referendum result laid bare. I believe that as part of healing that country, a part of bringing the country back together, electoral reform and votes at 16 have a key role to play. A way to demonstrate to people that, yes, every vote they cast is important, and yes, their voice does matter, and indeed it has been heard.